911, where's your emergency?
My nephew, Ryan Champion, just came to my door, and his wrists have been tied with duct tape, and I haven't been able to find out what's wrong. And you need an ambulance, Ryan? Okay, need an ambulance? Okay, right across the road from me. Who's over there, Ryan? Nobody now. I'm going to take him over across the road. I'm going to go over there with him, okay?
Okay, ma'am. 911, where's your emergency?
Oh, please, I'm over. My brother has been shot. And his wife, Joy. My nephew is here, and my niece has been shot. Oh, please.
State troopers received the call just before noon Sunday. When they arrived on the scene, they found 62-year-old Lindsay Champion, his 60-year-old wife, Joy, and their 31-year-old daughter, Emily, all shot to death.
As was another man whom investigators have not named. They're not saying whether they believe he killed himself or whether one of the victims shot him.
The pastor of the family's church says the couple's son, Ryan Champion, survived that shooting.
As we approached the house, it looked very well kept, very nice residence on a very, very nice piece of property. When I got closer, I saw the body of Lindsay Champion outside.
He had a lot of blood coming from his head. In the basement, I observed Joy, face down, kind of in the fetal position, but on her knees with her head on the ground. There was an obvious bullet hole in the storm door.
We went into the living room. I saw Emily Champion duct taped, lying in the floor.
She had duct tape wrapped around her face, her feet, her ankles, and her hands. And I was just thinking, why she taped so much? It was overkill. And it didn't make sense.
As we entered the dining room area, there was an unidentified male.
He was laying on the floor with a bullet hole right in the middle of his face and a roll of duct tape by his shoes. We were able to identify through an ID that was in his wallet as Vito Riservato. He was a 22-year-old male that had been residing in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. At that point, he was suspect number one. And I can remember standing there thinking, why'd you do this? What caused you to flip your switch and come in here and kill all these people?
The Champions were very well known in the community. Joy was a longtime teacher who everybody loved.
Joy was so well loved, she was honored as Teacher of the Year. Lindsay Champion was the director of a credit union, and he had cattle.
They had a large farm operation, and they were both very successful at what they did.
Their daughter, Dr. Emily Champion, is a veterinarian in Louisiana. Her particular love was for horses.
Emily was very smart, very ambitious, had a very successful career, and very well liked in the community.
The biggest question was why? Why did this happen?
He's claiming self-defense, and when you have that, you got to take it at face value until you kind of dig in deeper and get into the details.
Give me some backstory to where everything started.
The first time I ever met this guy was in a work-type situation.
Do you know his name?
Vito. At the time, my relationship with him didn't last very long at all. I brought him over here one day, and Emily was here, and I was just here to pick up my laundry. And apparently the whole time that I was upstairs and downstairs getting my stuff together, he was hitting on Emily. Creeped her out, apparently.
About how long ago did all this stuff happen?
Thursday.
Ryan said that was enough to fire him. But he said that the day after Ryan and Vito had gone to Ryan's parents' house, that Vito had showed up back at the Champion residence.
When I came yesterday, Mom said she was spooked. She said that basically he just said he was out of gas. Can I talk to Emily? Why do you want to talk to Emily? And he said he just thought she was the prettiest girl in the whole world. Cheesy. And she said Dad took him out, got him some gas, and that was just it. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty messed up that I fired the guy and he comes back here.
About what time did you get here today?
9:30-ish.
Okay. All right.
So, me and Emily are just hanging out. God, I'm shaking. Vito comes in and he's got the gun that I've got set out on the counter. I just had it sitting there.
What did you have it sitting there for?
I was going to talk to Emily about the importance of, hey, for one, this dude really liked you. For two, he talked about creepy stuff. And for three, he came to the house.
Was it your gun or your father's gun?
It's my dad's gun.
Okay. All right.
All right. And he walks around the corner and he says, that if I do anything, he's going to shoot Emily. And then he goes in, he tapes us up. He wasn't trying to break anything or steal anything. He just wanted to talk to Emily.
Did he have the gun in his hand the whole time he was talking?
Yes. That's when Mom and Dad came home. He ran outside. Me and Emily trying to get free, and that's when we heard the first gunshot. It's still at that point, I thought he had fired off a shot to scare somebody. And then I heard a second one in a different place. Before I could think, he runs back inside, doesn't say a word, and shoots Emily. He's out of bullets, he reloads, and I made my move. I pushed him back up against the wall. As soon as he broke away, bam. It was just that quick.
His story that he told just kind of sounded very odd. Was it going to be a kidnapping? Was it going to be a robbery? Well, what was going on? When you're dealing with a victim, everybody responds differently to traumatic situations, but it sure makes you want to look at him a little bit more. The weapon that was used in these murders was a .45 caliber 1911 model handgun. We were able to retrieve it and take it as evidence. She told me when he ran across the street, Ryan was still duct taped around his wrists, and she had cut the tape off and it was in the trash, and she allowed us to retrieve it and take it as evidence.
There's really no comparison that could be made on the amount of duct tape that Emily had on her body versus what Ryan had around his wrists.
Also, the tape should have rolled towards Ryan's thumbs and hands, because it was taped, around his wrists, and there didn't appear to be any stretching, and we're talking about fighting for your life and fighting the gun away, and he didn't show anything like that.
The questions really started going in my head at that point.
We do a neighborhood canvass, and while doing that, we're able to locate a Ford Explorer in the woods adjacent to the Champion residence. The vehicle came back to Vito Riservato, who we were able to identify in the kitchen. It was parked in a spot where you wouldn't know that there's a parking lane there because of the trees and the foliage. So that was something we had to look into.
I will never forget Detective Miller sitting in front of the residence as we were discussing what Ryan Champion had said and what we had seen so far at the scene. him saying something isn't right here.
Okay, Ryan, we're at the Cadiz Police Department. If you could, start from the beginning.
At this point, he's either innocent or guilty. So we needed to really look at him more and lock them in a story.
When people saw the Champion family, they saw a lot of love. Lindsay and Joy decided to adopt a baby who was a few months old at the time, and that baby was Ryan Champion.
And several years later, Emily was born.
They were very proud of Emily. She was a young, vibrant woman, and she had her whole life ahead of her. They were an idyllic family. There was a lot of love, and this came out of nowhere as far as the community was concerned.
You got to go back days for the actual start of this.
Okay, start from the beginning.
All right, I met this guy. His name is Vito. I was up in Hopkinsville. There's an old friend of mine who I was seeing, and my friend Ann pulls me to the side and says he didn't have a place to stay that night. It's like I saw a guy who definitely seemed like he was down on his luck, and he's a single father, and that's kind of what touched me to try to help this guy.
Okay, let's start off at when you got there today. You said you arrived about 9 o'clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that in detail.
So I get one of the guns out. I've got it sitting on the counter. I'm getting ready to have a discussion with Emily about, hey, look, you need to be aware of this situation.
You took the gun out. Where did you retrieve the gun at?
The gun belongs down in my dad's gun area.
It's in the basement there, right? Where the safe's at. I seen it.
Yeah.
And was it on a shelf?
Oh, yes. They keep on the top.
So you walk upstairs, and where do you put the gun at?
On the countertop.
He told a story, and he gave his version of events. I didn't discard it as not true, but I didn't necessarily buy it either. Something weird's going on, but to what extent we didn't know.
Did you have any involvement in either your father's death, your mother's death, or your sister's death?
No.
You were just a victim like they were, correct?
Correct.
I'm gonna end this right now. Like I said, we're gonna talk in the future. 24 hours.
Vito had no criminal history. I don't even remember him seeing a speeding ticket. We executed a search warrant on Vito's truck. In the backseat ashtray, we found .45 caliber shell casings. And they were the same brand and caliber that was actually used in the shootings. We just wondered, what if that handgun had been fired and produced those empty shell casings? Why would they be in Vito's truck if Ryan didn't hardly know Vito and Ryan was in possession of the handgun? So we thought, okay, we'll send these off to the lab after we photograph them, but it could take weeks or months. Ann Plotkin came up in Ryan's initial interview, so we went and talked to her.
I'm here with Ann Plotkin, and I'm also here with Detective Miller. You said you seen him about Thursday, Friday?
He popped in, but I haven't seen him in a while. I haven't seen him in a long while.
Now, you introduced Ryan and Vito. Was it before Thursday? Or?
No, it was... I'm trying to think now. That was, maybe it was, I don't know. They've only known each other maybe a week, tops maybe.
We knew within a few minutes of talking to her that she was full of it. She only was telling us what Ryan told us, almost verbatim, and she didn't deviate from any of that. We walked out looking at each other after we shut the door, grinning.
She was lying.
Ann knows a whole lot more about this than she's telling us. We were determined to figure out what her involvement actually was.
You had actually contacted us. Why don't you tell us what information you have?
Roughly 6 years ago, Ryan Champion came to my house, and then he started talking about how he hated his parents and how they've been doing him wrong and how he hates his sister. Then he laid out this little idea he had about killing his entire family and how he wanted me to take part in it. He even said he would give me $20,000 after he got inheritance or whatever the hell was going on. Well, I thought he wasn't serious. Well, after I saw the news story, I think he was telling the truth. I guarantee Ryan Champion pulled the trigger on all 4 of them. And I'm hoping the pieces of the puzzle will prove it.
Now, you also know Vito, too, right?
I knew Vito very well. He lived with me for a few months. He dated my daughter.
Where do you think you met?
At my wife's house. My estranged wife's house. And Plotkin, that's right. My wife and Ryan known each other 8 years or better. They started having an affair. That's why we're getting divorced. They had an ongoing affair that I was unaware of for a long period of time. Ryan and Ann. Which is why I'm thinking he was trying to set me up to be the fall guy when he was talking to me.
So that was very big. Made us feel that there was a deeper connection between the two, connecting them even further with their involvement in this case. So we made a trip to Waffle House. We're getting the video ready. And we found the date and time roughly, and we started looking, and all of a sudden we see these people come walking through the door. And there's Ann. And then there's Ryan, and there's Vito. And they walked over to a booth. Now that was on the 21st of October. And Ryan, in all of his interviews so far, said he had only met Vito on the 23rd. So he's obviously deliberately lied to us about how long he had known Vito.
Things were adding up, but in order to arrest someone on a felony offense, you need probable cause.
In a perfect world, we wanted a confession. Detective Silphy said he'll never confess. He's never gonna come off of it. So we need to have Ryan come back and walk through the scene and have him demonstrate what happened. And so we called and asked him, and he was all about it.
Okay, good. Just do what you did that day, and just you could tell me what you're doing.
There is a lot of pressure. Is he gonna talk enough that we can build a case on him based on his lies?
I'd come in that morning. I was conveniently late to miss being asked to go to church, and Emily had conveniently slept in.
And the whole idea of the walkthrough is to see if he can stay with his story while demonstrating what happened. He was very excited to do this, but he had an edge of nervousness.
You know, I came in with a gun. I had a talk with Emily. Is like, do you understand, you know, that...
Now, you came in with a gun?
Yes. No.
And from where?
And from outside. The gun was in my truck. It was Dad's gun. I had it. It was the gun that I used when I went anywhere for work.
Okay. I must have misunderstood you, because in the interview you said you went downstairs and got the gun off a shelf.
Oh no, I said he kept it. Well, that's where he kept it and all of his guns. So when I didn't have it, that's where it was.
And there you go. There's an inconsistency. We're about 30 seconds into this. Ryan couldn't keep his story straight on where it came from that morning.
I'll just do it the way he did it, right in my hands, about as many times as he did.
All right, now what I was doing was, I thought I was being a little bit smart, is I was kind of like holding my wrist out a little bit.
What, like that?
Yeah, kind of.
For the purpose of the walkthrough, we told Ryan that he's going to be Vito. And Detective Silfies was Ryan, and I was Emily. And we wanted him to show us the manner in which they were both taped up.
Where did you cut it off?
He usually, he either tore it or he did his teeth. With me, he said, hold tight.
Okay, what did you do next?
All right, now give that a try.
We didn't really question him in a authoritative way. It was all, oh, really? Okay. I'm just curious how you did this. And he's more than happy to show us.
Take your tape off.
Well, that's the question. You're focused on there. Well, you know, the tape comes off if it's like that.
Oh, well, I mean, I didn't like tape you tight or
I
anything.
told you to tape it the way it's supposed to.
Do you want me to?
But what really stood out was it took very little effort for Detective Silfies to get out of the duct tape. When Ryan was questioned about that, they did it again.
I feel like I'm about to drop the gun in a minute. All right. All right.
Ain't nothing to be nervous about, man. You're the victim here.
It just, I don't know. All right.
Come on. Don't be nervous. Do it like you did it to you.
All right.
Here, boy.
Hold still. All right. He wasn't like as careful with her. He was doing it more quickly.
All right.
I guess because he figured, you know, at first, you know, he just, you know.
But his attention's all focused on you. I mean, not on her, right? You know, that's just it. All you gotta do is twist your hands and it runs out. Because you're sweating.
I sure didn't do that though.
Yeah. Well, keep going.
Yeah, keep going. For him to so nonchalantly reenact what happened just a few days prior to this to his family was pretty shocking. I was ready to, confront him about it, and Detective Silfies was saying it's not time yet. We just wait and let him dig the hole deeper.
Put her down. He kind of halfway tripped her.
All right. Where does she go? Right here?
She goes right here.
Here. This room. Okay.
She goes right here. He gets her down. He gets her down. She goes down. And he just kind of like straddles her. Emily's like kicking around and everything, squirming. I mean, not actually like fighting, but she's really resisting, trying to get out. And she's squirming, and she kind of works herself where she's kind of like wedged inside of this doorway, and he's just straddling, riding. This is one of those times where I just wonder if I had run over
looked more like acting than emotion. My personal opinion and the opinion of family is that Emily would have kicked Vito's tail, even if he had a gun. I think it took both of them to get her corralled and get her taped up, because I think she would have fought tooth and nail.
Once I got the gun away from you, there you go. I mean, we're still locked up like this, and he has started to grab me with that hand, so you haven't got me grabbed, but, well. All right, here we go. All I gotta do is hold it like this. I know exactly. And push him back.
As he's trying to demonstrate here how he got it away from him, and he just can't make it work. And he's kind of laughing. I think he thinks, and I've tried to show them what happened, and this isn't working. It is I'm in trouble after.
Have I done an okay job? I'm not the best explainer in the world. I never have been.
Every time we talked to him up to that point, it was very casual, really not questioning him on anything. And this time we wanted to start kind of putting pressure on him.
In looking at the case out there, there's a lot of things that have popped up in our investigation we want to iron out.
Of course.
All right. The whole gun thing.
First you told me that you went to the basement and retrieved the gun, because we went over it. Did you get it out of the safe?
I actually said that I retrieved it.
Yes, you went down to the basement to get it. Talked about it for a while, and then today you told me you brought it.
Gun being in your car versus downstairs in the basement in your dad's gun room, I'll call it.
Correct.
Okay, that's an inconsistency that popped up today.
Correct. Well, the thing is I did a bad job of explaining.
That's not a bad job of explaining. It's totally the opposite.
I thought, no, your communication skills are fine. You just happen to have killed your family, and you don't want to tell us what happened.
Let's go on to the next one. This one is what I'm curious about.
Okay.
The duct tape. We seen today on the reenactment earlier.
Yeah, that y'all could get it.
Yeah, it wasn't that hard.
Yeah. And the thing is, I suppose I could have too, but it just wasn't, I wasn't thinking that.
Okay, he's paying a lot of attention to your sister.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have just ran out the side door. Why didn't you do that and go for help?
No way.
Why?
Well, my sister's there.
Did you love your sister?
Yes.
Did it cross your mind at all you wanted to just rip his head off and piss down his throat for doing that to your sister?
Yes, and that's what made that so difficult. But if I had run at him from across the room and failed, your card's played. Why play your only card when you can't be sure it'll work?
Because if you don't, you're probably going to die anyway. We towed Vito's vehicle post. Okay, and we searched it. And we found the very same shell casings that we found at your house in the back of his vehicle. Spent. We sent those off and we had them tested against the gun, and the shell casings we found in the cup holder in the back seat of Vito's Explorer were fired from the gun you had in your possession that day. And we can't figure that out, man. We're stuck.
And that was the ruse, because we were really confident that they were going to match. We had a working theory that They planned the murders at the Waffle House, and Ryan gave Vito the handgun to go do some target shooting.
We don't understand how that's the case.
Could he have stolen my gun out of my truck?
You tell us. You said you never lost it anyway, so that didn't happen. It wasn't lost.
Well, I mean,
did y'all go target practicing?
No.
Okay. Now that's a speed bump. We're just gonna have to figure out what happened there. Why he has used your gun to shoot stuff.
He must have taken it out of my truck.
When?
How? I don't know.
You could see the wheels start turning in his head. He didn't know they were in that truck. If he did, he forgot about it. And then he had to come up with some other way that happened.
Okay. What about Waffle House?
Waffle House.
You ever been to Waffle House with him?
Let me think. Yes, one night with him and Ann.
Why'd you leave that out?
Well, it's just, I don't remember that. That's a petty detail.
Ryan, that's Vito we're talking about, all right? That's the guy that killed
the guy you told me on Sunday you met one time.
I know, but you gotta, that was before. That was when he was just a layabout presence.
No, that's not, it's just you and her and him. It's not a layabout presence.
It seems like they were doing a lot of talking at the table.
Y'all were chatting it up, chatty Cathy, man.
Well, that's kind of what I do.
Look.
I remember, it took you saying it to jog my memory that I even went to Waffle House with you.
You left out being with the guy that killed your entire family.
But I didn't, how could I have known that at the time?
Is it possible you gave him the gun to kill your family?
No.
That's not possible.
No.
And how did the shell casings get in his truck?
I don't know.
Well, I think I do.
I think I do too. Well, we've been waiting for you to tell the truth here.
And all you're doing is walking in circles. You're dancing in a circle here. Okay? Man up.
Look, the only thing I can think of is he might have stolen it. He must have stolen it.
Do you think anybody with half a brain is going to think that he stole it and brought it back?
Maybe.
No, they're not, Ryan.
It's go time. We want him to know that we know what happened, that he's involved in it. Because we felt that if we didn't get it this night, that we probably wouldn't get it at all.
You're in a quandary. This looks bad because it is bad. Your whole family's dead and you're alive, Ryan. You got out of there without a mark. Listen to me, don't talk. The gun that was used to kill your family was given to Vito by you for whatever reason. I don't know if it was for money or what, but you gave Vito that gun to come and assassinate your family, okay? They didn't deserve that. And you could only make that right by being honest.
All I ever did was try to help that kid.
The evidence doesn't suggest.
I did that all the time. That's what I do. I help out. I
Ryan,
bring
listen
food.
to me. Listen to me. You didn't help your mom, your dad, and your sister.
There's a reason I have that reputation. My dad was the same way. He'd help anybody.
Your dad's dead because of you, Ryan.
My dad is not dead because of me.
Yes, he is.
No, you can't be serious right now.
Hey.
You can't be serious.
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The duct tape was so minimal on you and so maximal on your sister, it made no sense. And your story today didn't make any sense. Listen, it's not believable, all right? It's not believable. The only guy that survives is you, all right? Your sister was shot 3 times. Your mom and dad are dead. The guy that, in my opinion, you brought in there to do all this stuff, you killed. I believe that happened. But look, Ryan, listen to me. You see how this looks? See where this is going? And then, yeah.
Can I go out and smoke, please? While y'all have a minute.
You're gonna come back and tell the truth.
During the smoke break, he told Detective Silfies that he didn't want to talk anymore. He wanted an attorney. But I think he knew that with everything we had that he had no other alternative but to stop talking at that point.
Ryan, I happened to give him some contact information. While we were outside, he had asked for an attorney. He was getting
Guys,
other
look,
questions.
y'all have both been decent and fair with me throughout this whole process. I think up until tonight, and I know this isn't a requirement for the job, but one thing it definitely wasn't was nice, or it was not courtesy.
I understand that, Ryan, but killing your family ain't nice either, brother.
And I've got a job to do, and so I don't really care if he thinks I'm nice or not. I want to get to the bottom of what happened.
You've got test results to come in, and what you're basing these opinions on is something that nobody can know. What he was thinking, what he was knowing.
Based on evidence.
And
evidence doesn't lie, brother.
I mean, just put simply, if y'all have this...
Let me just have a minute with Detective Miller. I'll be back in. That's for your lawyer. I'm not asking any questions.
Okay.
We had suspicion that Ann might be involved in the planning or even the execution of these murders, and she just agreed to come in and talk.
Hey, I got a couple questions for you. Thank you for coming in.
We want to see if she'd let us see what's in her phone, messages between her and Ryan or her and Vito, because we didn't have any records back at the time.
Do you have any messages there between you and Ryan?
No.
You
Except
don't?
for maybe
Okay, now
one
here's-
or two text messages.
Would you mind if I looked at it?
I don't see why.
You don't see why I would want to, you don't see why not.
No.
Well, we're working a murder investigation. There might be something that'll help us. You want justice, don't you? Is there a reason you don't want me looking at the phone?
Because it's my personal stuff.
Okay. But it might vindicate your buddy Ryan. Or you're hiding something. Would you mind if I looked at the message between you and Ryan?
You do.
But a yes or a no?
Okay, he asked if I had groceries, if I'd eaten.
All right.
And Vito was on the job site there,
Where did it say that?
right here.
What job site?
When
Vito's
he,
face is getting cold
Yes.
at the work site. You got anything he could wear, okay?
yeah,
What day is that?
That's the
23rd, he was there at the job site
What job site?
where they were working on the floor and the tile and crap.
Okay.
She was obviously trying to skip past stuff that she thought would make her or Ryan or Vito look in a bad light.
What on that phone are you hiding from us?
I ain't hiding crap, that's just it. I
But
showed
why did you stop
everything.
right there at the 23rd?
Because
and
there was
23rd?
nothing else there.
There was more down there, you
No,
stopped.
there was not.
Okay, let me tell you now. If
Never.
the phone records come back and there's stuff between you and you're hiding it, you're gonna be charged.
Okay.
Okay.
Because there ain't nothing there.
All right. That's how you want to go, that's fine. But you're
Well,
trying
I'd like to know why Ryan's lying again. He couldn't have been at
About what?
he wasn't at a job site with Vito on the 23rd.
No, I wasn't with him.
But you won't let me look at your phone.
Like I said, it's my personal stuff.
I was sitting in trial in another murder case, and I thought, what if the duct tape can tell us the order of who was taped when? Because I've had some training that you can place duct tape back together like a torn piece of paper.
Ryan was always consistent that he was taped first by Vito Reservato and that he could not assist his sister because he was taped first.
I got the roll of duct tape from evidence, and I got the tape cut from Ryan's wrist, and lo and behold, it was a perfect match. So we know Ryan was taped last, which goes against his story.
We knew that we had enough to charge him with murder.
Ryan Champion came into court Monday shackled after investigators charged him with capital murder and kidnapping. That's something his friend, Ann Plotkin, refuses to believe.
I don't understand it. I really don't, because I know Ryan and know there is no way.
Ryan was in jail, but the investigation's not even close to over. I was pretty obsessed with the case, and I went through thousands of pages of records. There was never direct communication between Ryan and Vito, but there was direct communication from Vito to Ann to Ryan and back and forth.
When we got that information back, we knew that Ann Plotkin had assisted in the planning of the murders. I think she loved Ryan. I think Ryan used her, and that's how she came to have participated in this. I will never forget how horrible it is that a adopted child who Joy and Lindsay had given a great life committed this horrendous crime.
Joy, Lindsay, and Emily were just sweet people who wanted to do good in their community.
There's no penalty severe enough for taking Joy, Lindsay, and Emily's lives. Nor is there penalty sufficient for the anguish we've endured.
People talk about closure, but I don't even believe in that. I think it's an open wound that never really goes away.
In Central Florida, beneath the relentless summer heat of February 1987, a lonely stretch of road became the silent keeper of a secret that would haunt detectives, divide a community, destroy a marriage, and challenge nearly everything people believed about justice. It began with a young woman who should have been home long before sunset. It ended with blood soaking into the sandy soil, a car abandoned miles away, and questions that refused to die. For decades, one name carried the weight of murder. Courtrooms declared the case solved. Newspapers moved on. Families struggled to survive. Yet somewhere beyond the headlines, hidden in microscopic traces that science could not yet read, another story waited patiently. It would take nearly 4 decades before a single strand of DNA would force investigators to look again at a crime everyone thought they understood. Michelle Schofield was only 20 years old. Friends remembered her as energetic, outspoken, and fiercely independent. She had recently married Leo Schofield, a young man with big dreams and an equally fierce temper according to some who knew him. Like many young couples, they were trying to build a life with limited money but unlimited hope. They argued. They reconciled. They imagined a future that seemed ordinary enough to escape attention. No one around them imagined that within months, their names would become permanently linked to one of Florida's most controversial homicide investigations. Friday, February 24, 1987, appeared completely ordinary. Nothing about the day suggested it would become one of the most examined dates in Florida criminal history. Michelle spent time running errands and planning for the weekend. The routines were familiar, almost forgettable. The kind of ordinary moments investigators later dissect with painful precision because every minute suddenly matters. As daylight faded, Michelle left home to buy groceries. She drove alone in the family's Mazda pickup truck. The trip should have taken only a short time. She never returned. At first, there was no panic. Delays happen. Traffic builds unexpectedly. A forgotten stop becomes another errand. But as the hours stretched into the night, concerns slowly hardened into fear. Leo began searching for his wife. Friends joined the effort. Calls were made. Roads were checked. Every passing hour made the silence heavier. Missing person cases often begin with uncertainty. Adults sometimes disappear voluntarily. Police departments know this. They hesitate before assuming the worst. But experienced investigators also recognize something else. Occasionally, an absence carries a different feeling. It arrives wrapped in instinct. Something is wrong. Something irreversible has already happened. By the following day, Michelle Schofield's disappearance had become an active investigation. Detectives retraced her expected route. They interviewed relatives, friends, neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who might have seen her after she left home. They searched parking lots, roadside shoulders, vacant fields, and wooded areas. Volunteers spread across Polk County hoping for any sign of the missing 20-year-old. Days passed. Then came the discovery that transformed a missing person investigation into a homicide. Michelle's body was found in a remote drainage canal area near a dirt road. The location was isolated enough that someone familiar with rural Florida could have believed it would remain undiscovered for a long time. Instead, the crime scene exploded into one of the region's largest investigations. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. Michelle had suffered multiple stab wounds. Her body bore evidence of a violent attack carried out with extraordinary force. The scene suggested rage. Not robbery. Not an accident. Not a random disappearance. Whoever killed Michelle had come frighteningly close. The attack was personal in its violence, even if the motive remained completely unknown. Crime scene technicians moved methodically through the area. Every footprint mattered. Every fiber mattered. Every stain mattered. Yet forensic science in 1987 was nothing like the science available decades later. DNA profiling was still in its infancy. Many biological samples that today might immediately identify a suspect were carefully collected but effectively placed into storage, waiting for technology that did not yet exist. Investigators photographed everything. Measurements. Blood patterns. Vegetation. Tire impressions. The position of the body. Nothing could be overlooked because no one knew which tiny detail might someday unlock the entire mystery. Meanwhile, another discovery complicated the investigation even further. Michelle's truck was found abandoned miles away from where her body lay. Someone had driven it after the murder. That raised immediate questions. Had the killer acted alone? Was the truck abandoned simply to delay discovery? Did someone else move the vehicle? Inside the truck, detectives searched desperately for fingerprints, biological evidence, and anything capable of identifying whoever had last occupied the driver's seat. Every unanswered question produced 3 more. As news spread across Lakeland and the surrounding communities, fear settled over neighborhoods. Parents warned their daughters not to travel alone. Stores closed earlier. Conversations shifted from everyday routines to speculation. People wondered whether a stranger had entered the community. Others believed the killer had to be someone Michelle knew. Rumors spread faster than verified facts. Someone claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles. Someone else remembered an unfamiliar man walking along the road. Another witness thought they heard screams days earlier. Each tip demanded attention. Most led nowhere. Detectives faced enormous pressure. A beautiful young woman had been murdered. The public demanded answers. The media demanded progress. The family demanded justice. In homicide investigations, attention naturally turns toward those closest to the victim. Statistics support that approach. Current or former intimate partners are frequently examined first, not because guilt is presumed, but because experience has shown they often possess critical information. Leo Schofield quickly became one of the central figures investigators needed to understand. Detectives questioned him repeatedly. They examined his timeline, his movements, his statements, his relationship with Michelle. Friends described passionate arguments between the couple. Others insisted the marriage, despite its struggles, remained loving. Different memories painted entirely different portraits. Some recalled loud confrontations. Others remembered affection. Human relationships rarely fit neatly into courtroom narratives. Investigators searched the Schofield home. They examined clothing, vehicles, personal belongings, possible weapons. Any indication that violence had erupted before Michelle disappeared. Reports emerged that investigators believed certain physical evidence suggested Leo might have been involved. The details became subjects of intense debate both inside and outside the courtroom. Some evidence appeared compelling. Other interpretations would later face criticism. But in those early weeks, detectives believed the investigation was narrowing. Pressure mounted with every passing day. Television cameras followed investigators. Reporters waited outside government buildings. Every development became front-page news. Then witnesses began coming forward with stories that appeared to strengthen suspicions surrounding Michelle's husband. Some described his emotional reactions. Others discussed previous arguments. A handful interpreted certain behaviors as unusual. Behavior, however, is a dangerous foundation upon which to build certainty. Grief has no universal appearance. Shock does not follow predictable rules. One person's panic resembles another person's guilt. Investigators know this. Jurors struggle with it. Communities rarely do. While detectives worked publicly, another battle unfolded quietly inside forensic laboratories. Technicians analyzed blood evidence using the methods available in the late 1980s. Serology could identify blood types. Microscopic examination could compare hairs and fibers. Fingerprints remained invaluable when recoverable. But the revolutionary power of modern DNA identification remained largely beyond practical reach. Evidence that would later become decisive sat frozen in possibility. The killer, whoever he was, had unknowingly left behind biological material that scientists simply could not yet fully interpret. Time became both friend and enemy. Witness memories faded. Physical evidence deteriorated. Rumors multiplied. Public confidence shifted with every newspaper headline. For Michelle's parents, every sunrise meant another day without answers. For Leo, every interview tightened the spotlight. For investigators, every incomplete lead threatened to become another dead end. The emotional landscape surrounding the case grew increasingly volatile. Some residents believed police were close to solving the crime. Others whispered that detectives had already chosen their suspect before every piece of evidence had been examined. Neither side possessed the full picture. Neither side understood how many years this investigation would continue. Somewhere beyond the official files, another life continued uninterrupted. Someone who had encountered Michelle during the final hours before her death returned to ordinary routines. That individual carried knowledge unavailable to detectives. Knowledge hidden behind silence. Knowledge invisible beneath the limitations of contemporary forensic science. The murder weapon had not spoken. The fingerprints had not told a complete story. The blood had not yet revealed the identity written within it. In 1987, DNA was still more promise than certainty. Few could imagine that decades later, technology would become so precise it could identify a person from biological traces smaller than the eye could appreciate. The evidence waited anyway. Locked inside storage rooms. Catalogued. Preserved. Almost forgotten. Outside those evidence lockers, investigators continued assembling their theory of the crime using the information they had, unaware that the smallest cells collected from Michelle's truck and clothing would someday challenge assumptions that seemed increasingly certain. The search for Michelle Schofield's killer had only just begun, but already the investigation stood at a crossroads where emotion, circumstantial evidence, public pressure, and scientific limitation collided. Before long, those forces would produce an arrest that convinced many justice had been served, while planting the seeds of one of the most fiercely disputed murder convictions in modern Florida history. The investigation accelerated with a sense of urgency that left little room for hesitation. Every detective assigned to the case understood the pressure building inside the sheriff's office. A 20-year-old woman had been brutally murdered. The community demanded swift action. Local newspapers carried updates almost daily. Television crews lingered outside government buildings, waiting for even the smallest development. Every hour without an arrest invited criticism. Every unanswered question fueled another rumor. As the circle around Michelle Schofield's final days tightened, attention increasingly settled on one person whose life had already been turned upside down by her disappearance, her husband, Leo Schofield. The interviews became longer. More detailed. Investigators asked the same questions repeatedly, looking for inconsistencies that might reveal deception. They reconstructed the hours before Michelle vanished minute by minute. Where had Leo been? Who had seen him? What time had he left home? When had he realized Michelle was missing? Had the couple argued? Had anyone witnessed violence inside the marriage? To experienced homicide detectives, these were routine questions. In nearly every domestic homicide investigation, spouses become the first focus. It was not a presumption of guilt but an investigative necessity. Yet the longer the interviews continued, the more investigators believed they were seeing a pattern that pointed toward Leo. Friends and acquaintances offered conflicting descriptions of the marriage. Some portrayed the couple as deeply devoted despite ordinary marital disagreements. Others remembered explosive arguments, moments when tempers flared and emotions spilled into public view. Detectives documented every account. Each statement added another piece to a puzzle that still refused to form a complete picture. No witness described seeing Leo kill Michelle. No witness claimed to have watched the couple together on the night of the murder after she left for the grocery store. Instead, investigators found themselves assembling a case built largely on circumstances, behavior, and interpretation. The prosecution would later argue that the relationship had become increasingly unstable. They suggested jealousy, financial stress, and repeated conflict had created a motive. Detectives searched for physical evidence inside the home that might support that theory. They examined clothing for traces of blood. They photographed vehicles. They inspected tools, knives, carpets, and flooring. Every object became a potential source of evidence. Some findings appeared significant to investigators. Others would become subjects of fierce dispute for decades. Among the evidence discussed during the investigation were observations about stains, scratches, and items that detectives believed deserved closer scrutiny. Defense attorneys would later challenge the interpretation of several of these observations, arguing that investigators saw confirmation of their suspicions rather than objective facts. But during those early weeks, the momentum of the investigation continued moving in only one direction. Detectives also examined Leo's actions after Michelle disappeared. They questioned why he searched certain areas before others. They analyzed his emotional reactions during interviews. They compared statements made on different days, looking for subtle changes in wording. Human memory is imperfect, especially under extreme stress. A frightened husband may remember events differently each time he recounts them. A guilty suspect may rehearse details until every answer sounds identical. The challenge for investigators is distinguishing one from the other. That distinction is rarely as clear as television dramas suggest. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued processing evidence collected from Michelle's truck. The vehicle itself represented one of the most important pieces of the investigation. Someone had driven it after Michelle was attacked. Whoever abandoned it might have left fingerprints, fibers, blood, or biological material. The limitations of 1987 technology quickly became apparent. Latent fingerprints were examined carefully, but not every print could be identified. Biological samples were preserved, yet many could not provide the individual identification that modern DNA analysis routinely delivers today. Investigators worked with the best science available, but science itself still had limits. Those limits quietly shaped the direction of the case. Without definitive forensic identification pointing toward an unknown assailant, detectives increasingly relied upon witness statements and circumstantial evidence. As the weeks passed, another element began influencing public opinion. Media coverage. Television reports frequently highlighted the difficult relationship between Leo and Michelle. Stories emphasized previous arguments and portrayed the marriage as troubled. While many reports accurately reflected testimony gathered during the investigation, repeated headlines gradually created a narrative that many viewers accepted before any courtroom proceedings had even begun. Public perception can become remarkably powerful. Once a narrative takes hold, every new fact is often interpreted through that existing belief. If someone is already viewed as suspicious, ordinary behavior suddenly appears sinister. If someone is viewed as innocent, even troubling evidence may be dismissed. The investigation unfolded under exactly those conditions. Detectives continued interviewing anyone connected to Michelle's life. Co-workers, neighbors, friends from school, family members, former acquaintances. Each interview sought one critical answer. Did anyone else have reason to harm Michelle? No obvious alternative suspect emerged. There were no confirmed threats from strangers. No documented stalker. No established pattern suggesting a serial offender operating nearby. The absence of another clear suspect strengthened investigators' confidence in the direction they had chosen. Eventually, authorities arrested Leo Schofield and charged him with Michelle's murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through Polk County. For some residents, it confirmed what they already believed. The husband had done it. The case was solved. Justice was moving forward. For others, doubts remained. The evidence, they argued, seemed incomplete. Questions still lingered about the truck. Questions remained about the crime scene. Questions persisted regarding whether investigators had thoroughly explored every possible lead before focusing almost exclusively on Michelle's husband. Those doubts would grow louder in the years ahead. The trial attracted enormous attention. Courtrooms filled with spectators. Reporters occupied every available seat. Families on both sides prepared to relive the most painful moments imaginable. The prosecution presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and forensic interpretations available at the time. They argued that Leo's volatile temper, combined with problems inside the marriage, established both motive and opportunity. Witnesses described arguments between the couple. Investigators explained the evidence they believed connected Leo to the crime. Experts discussed physical findings recovered during the investigation. Each witness added another layer to the prosecution's narrative. The defense approached the case from an entirely different perspective. They argued that no eyewitness placed Leo at the murder scene. No definitive forensic evidence directly established that he committed the stabbing. The defense challenged interpretations made by investigators, suggesting alternative explanations existed for several pieces of evidence introduced by the prosecution. They emphasized the absence of conclusive physical proof tying Leo to the actual killing. Jurors faced an extraordinarily difficult task. Unlike cases built around confessions or clear eyewitness testimony, this prosecution depended on the cumulative weight of numerous individual facts. Each piece alone might appear inconclusive. Together, prosecutors argued, they formed an unmistakable picture of guilt. Defense attorneys insisted that picture contained assumptions rather than certainty. The trial became a contest between competing interpretations of the same evidence. Emotion filled the courtroom. Michelle's family mourned the loss of a daughter whose future had been stolen. Leo maintained his innocence. His supporters insisted investigators had made a catastrophic mistake. The jury listened for days as attorneys reconstructed the final hours of Michelle's life. They studied photographs, reviewed timelines, heard expert testimony, examined forensic reports, evaluated witness credibility. After deliberation, the jury found Leo Schofield guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict appeared to bring finality. A conviction. A sentence. A declared killer. For many observers, the case was over. Yet beneath the certainty of the verdict, unresolved questions quietly remained. Several investigators believed justice had been achieved. Others outside the courtroom wondered whether too many unanswered questions had been left unexplored. The legal process moved forward. Appeals followed. As is common in serious criminal cases, defense attorneys challenged aspects of the conviction, arguing that errors had occurred during the investigation and trial. Courts reviewed those claims through established legal procedures. The conviction, however, remained in place. Years passed. The headlines faded. New crimes replaced old ones. Evidence boxes were transferred into long-term storage. Witnesses grew older. Some died. Memories softened with time. The public gradually forgot Michelle Schofield. But not everyone. Michelle's family continued grieving. Leo began serving a life sentence while consistently maintaining that he had not killed his wife. Outside prison walls, a small number of journalists, attorneys, and advocates periodically revisited the case. They questioned whether every available lead had truly been exhausted. One issue continued attracting quiet attention: the biological evidence recovered during the original investigation. Advances in forensic science during the 1990s transformed criminal investigations across the United States. DNA technology rapidly evolved from an experimental tool into one capable of identifying offenders with extraordinary precision. Cold cases once considered impossible began producing arrests decades after the crimes occurred. Across the country, evidence collected years earlier suddenly acquired new significance. Detectives reopened forgotten files. Evidence once considered scientifically useless became invaluable. Old assumptions faced fresh scrutiny. The Schofield case would eventually become part of that national transformation. Inside evidence storage facilities, biological samples connected to Michelle's murder still existed. Tiny traces. Barely visible. Collected carefully in 1987. Preserved according to procedures that no one at the time could fully appreciate. Those samples contained information no detective had ever been able to read. Information hidden inside human cells. Information that neither prosecutors nor defense attorneys had presented to the jury because the technology simply did not yet exist. For decades, those microscopic traces remained silent. But science does not stop advancing. As laboratories became capable of extracting genetic profiles from increasingly smaller samples, investigators around the country discovered that old evidence could speak with astonishing clarity. Cases once closed reopened. Wrongful convictions were overturned. Previously unidentified killers were finally named. The Schofield investigation stood on the edge of joining that growing list. No one involved in the 1987 investigation could have imagined that the most important witness had never testified during the original trial. It had been waiting all along inside a few invisible strands of biological evidence, preserved in storage, untouched by time, ready to tell a story completely independent of memory, rumor, opinion, or courtroom argument. That story, when scientists finally learned how to hear it, would introduce a name that had scarcely been part of the investigation at all, and force one of Florida's most debated murder cases back into the national spotlight. The years settled over the Michelle Schofield case like layers of dust inside an evidence room. Court records grew thicker. Appeal after appeal moved through the legal system. Detectives retired. Prosecutors changed offices. Reporters who had once covered every hearing shifted to newer headlines. To much of the public, the case had become history, a tragic story with a convicted killer serving a life sentence. But inside prison walls, Leo Schofield never stopped insisting that history had gotten it wrong. He repeated the same claim through interviews, legal filings, and conversations with supporters. He did not kill his wife. He acknowledged that his marriage to Michelle had been turbulent. He admitted they argued. He admitted he had flaws, a temper, and made mistakes that painted an unflattering picture before the jury. But, he maintained, none of those flaws made him a murderer. For years, those claims carried little weight. It is not unusual for convicted murderers to proclaim their innocence. Investigators hear such declarations routinely. Courts are accustomed to appeals built on arguments already considered during trial. Without new evidence, the conviction remained intact. Yet the evidence itself had not disappeared. It had simply outlived the science available when it was collected. Throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, forensic DNA technology evolved at a remarkable pace. Laboratories that once required large, pristine biological samples learned to recover usable genetic profiles from traces barely visible to the naked eye. Cold cases across the United States began yielding long-awaited answers. Victims who had remained unidentified received names. Unknown offenders were linked to crimes committed decades earlier. Cases long considered solved were reopened after DNA contradicted earlier assumptions. Every breakthrough raised an uncomfortable possibility. If science could identify the guilty with greater certainty, it could also expose investigative mistakes. The Schofield case gradually attracted renewed interest from attorneys, journalists, and innocence advocates who believed modern forensic testing might answer questions that had remained unresolved since 1987. Among those interested in the case was journalist Gilbert King. Known for his careful examination of controversial criminal convictions, King began studying the Schofield investigation in extraordinary detail. He reviewed court transcripts, investigative reports, witness statements, forensic records, and appellate filings. Rather than accepting either side's conclusions at face value, he focused on one central question. What did the evidence actually prove? As King dug deeper, he encountered something striking. The biological evidence recovered from Michelle's abandoned truck had never fully answered one obvious question. Who else had been inside that vehicle? The truck represented one of the final confirmed locations connected to Michelle before her body was discovered. Whoever abandoned it after the murder might have unknowingly left behind biological evidence. In 1987, investigators lacked the tools to identify every individual contributor. Decades later, those limitations no longer existed. Requests for additional DNA testing slowly gained momentum. The process was neither quick nor straightforward. Evidence collected decades earlier must be carefully preserved before retesting can even be considered. Chain of custody records require verification. Laboratories must determine whether sufficient biological material remains. Courts often become involved, particularly when testing could affect a long final conviction. Each step required patience. Years passed. Then came results that changed the conversation. DNA recovered from evidence associated with Michelle's truck produced a profile. It did not belong to Leo Schofield. Instead, it matched another man entirely. His name was Jeremy Scott. For investigators familiar with Florida criminal records, the name immediately stood out. Jeremy Scott was no ordinary citizen unexpectedly connected to an old homicide. He was a violent repeat offender. His criminal history stretched across years and included burglaries, assaults, robberies, and other serious offenses. He had spent much of his adult life moving in and out of prison. Violence followed him with alarming consistency. The DNA match transformed what had once seemed like a closed case into a deeply unsettling mystery. How had Jeremy Scott's DNA ended up inside Michelle Schofield's truck? The discovery did not automatically prove he committed murder. DNA establishes presence. It does not always explain circumstances. Investigators needed to determine whether there could be an innocent explanation. Had Scott ever owned the vehicle? No. Had he worked on it? No evidence suggested that. Did he know Michelle? Investigators found no confirmed connection. The questions multiplied. Scott's background made them even harder to ignore. Around the time Michelle was killed, Scott had been committing crimes throughout Central Florida. His offenses frequently involved entering vehicles, stealing property, and committing acts of violence. He operated opportunistically, often targeting strangers. Suddenly, the possibility emerged that Michelle's killer might not have been someone inside her personal life at all. Perhaps she had encountered a dangerous predator entirely by chance. The implications were enormous. If Scott had been involved, the original investigation might have focused so intensely on the husband that another viable suspect had never received sufficient scrutiny. Authorities began examining Scott's criminal history alongside Michelle's timeline. Patterns emerged that demanded attention. Scott often traveled through rural areas. He committed offenses near roadways. He demonstrated a willingness to use extreme violence. While similarities alone cannot establish guilt, investigators could no longer dismiss the coincidence. The DNA demanded explanation. Journalists covering the renewed investigation sought interviews with Jeremy Scott. Eventually, those interviews happened. Scott's behavior was unpredictable. At times he appeared cooperative. At other moments he contradicted himself. He spoke casually about violence, prison, and crime in ways many observers found deeply unsettling. Then came one of the most controversial developments in the entire case. Scott claimed he had killed Michelle Schofield. His account stunned nearly everyone involved. According to Scott, he encountered Michelle unexpectedly after attempting to steal her vehicle. He described a confrontation that escalated into fatal violence. He claimed he stabbed her and abandoned the truck afterward. The confession generated immediate headlines. Supporters of Leo Schofield believed the mystery had finally been solved. The real killer had confessed. The DNA matched. The conviction should be overturned. But investigators approached Scott's statements with caution. False confessions are rare but well documented. Some offenders exaggerate crimes they did not commit. Others seek attention. Still others mix truth with fiction. Authorities therefore compared Scott's account against known facts from the investigation. Some details appeared consistent with the evidence. Others were inaccurate or impossible to verify. Certain aspects of his narrative shifted between interviews. His credibility immediately became a central issue. Could Jeremy Scott be telling the truth? Or was he inserting himself into one of Florida's most notorious murder cases for reasons only he understood? The answer proved far more complicated than anyone expected. Prosecutors argued that Scott's confession contained inconsistencies serious enough to question its reliability. They maintained that Leo's conviction remained supported by the evidence presented at trial. Defense attorneys viewed the matter very differently. An unidentified violent offender's DNA inside the victim's truck. A criminal with a documented history of violent crime. A confession admitting responsibility. Together, they argued, these developments fundamentally changed the case. Legal battles intensified. Experts debated forensic findings. Former investigators defended their original conclusions. Others acknowledged that the new evidence deserved careful consideration. The public found itself divided once again. Some believed Leo had spent years imprisoned for a crime committed by another man. Others believed Jeremy Scott's involvement did not necessarily exclude Leo's participation. Could two men somehow have been involved? No evidence clearly established such a scenario. Could Scott simply have stolen the truck after Michelle had already been murdered elsewhere? Investigators examined that possibility as well. Every theory encountered significant obstacles. The case refused to settle into a simple narrative. Instead, it became even more complex than it had been in 1987. One microscopic DNA profile had reopened questions thought long buried beneath decades of legal certainty. For Michelle's family, the renewed attention reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The central tragedy remained unchanged. A young woman had been brutally murdered. Nothing uncovered decades later could restore the future stolen from her. Yet determining who actually committed that crime mattered profoundly. Justice depends not only upon convicting someone. It depends upon convicting the right person. As legal teams continued fighting over motions, hearings, and forensic analysis, one fact became impossible to ignore. The evidence that had once appeared complete no longer looked complete at all. A convicted husband still sat in prison. A violent career criminal carried DNA inside the victim's abandoned truck and had publicly claimed responsibility. Between those two realities stood a justice system forced to confront one of its most difficult questions. When new science collides with an old verdict, which deserves greater trust, the certainty of a jury's decision or the silent testimony preserved inside DNA for nearly 4 decades? Jeremy Scott had spent much of his adult life building a reputation that frightened even seasoned investigators. Long before his name surfaced in connection with Michelle Schofield's murder, he had become known throughout Florida's criminal justice system as a repeat violent offender whose crimes often appeared impulsive, unpredictable, and brutally opportunistic. Burglaries, robberies, assaults, and repeated incarcerations formed a pattern that stretched across years. Violence was not an isolated event in his life. It was a recurring theme. When his DNA emerged from evidence connected to Michelle's abandoned truck, investigators could not simply dismiss the finding as coincidence. The discovery demanded answers. How had a violent stranger's genetic material ended up inside the vehicle belonging to a woman who had been stabbed to death? The question echoed through courtrooms, forensic laboratories, newspaper offices, and legal clinics. Jeremy Scott eventually agreed to discuss the case in interviews conducted years after Michelle's murder. His demeanor unsettled many who listened. He often spoke without visible emotion, moving casually between descriptions of ordinary prison life and admissions of violent criminal behavior. There was little hesitation in his voice when discussing acts that would horrify most people. Whether that reflected honesty, manipulation, or emotional detachment became a matter of intense debate. Then he made a statement that reignited one of Florida's oldest murder cases. He claimed he had killed Michelle Schofield. According to Scott, the encounter had not been planned. He described targeting vehicles for theft, something entirely consistent with his documented criminal history. In his account, Michelle unexpectedly confronted him. A struggle followed. Violence escalated rapidly. He claimed he stabbed her repeatedly before abandoning the truck and fleeing. To supporters of Leo Schofield, the confession seemed to answer the mystery that had haunted the case for decades. A violent career criminal. DNA inside the victim's vehicle. A confession. What more, they asked, could possibly be required? But homicide investigators are trained to distrust even confessions, especially confessions arriving decades after the crime. History contains numerous examples of offenders falsely admitting responsibility for notorious murders. Some seek attention. Others enjoy manipulating investigators. Some suffer mental illness. Others simply insert themselves into famous cases because they know details already reported publicly. Every confession must therefore be tested against facts that only the true killer could know. Investigators began comparing Scott's statements with the original case file. Did his timeline match documented evidence? Did he accurately describe the crime scene? Could he identify details never released publicly? Some portions of Scott's account appeared consistent with known facts. Other parts immediately raised concerns. Certain descriptions conflicted with forensic evidence. Some sequences of events shifted during later interviews. At times, Scott admitted uncertainty. At other moments, he confidently described events that investigators believed had occurred differently. His story seemed to fluctuate between specific recollection and vague approximation. That inconsistency became one of the central reasons prosecutors questioned his credibility. They argued that Scott had likely learned details of the murder over the years through media reports, conversations, or prison gossip. The presence of his DNA inside the truck, they acknowledged, required explanation. But they maintained that his later confession did not necessarily establish him as Michelle's killer. Defense attorneys saw the situation very differently. If Scott had fabricated the confession, why was his DNA in Michelle's truck? That question refused to disappear. No confirmed innocent explanation emerged. Scott had no documented relationship with Michelle. He had never claimed to be a friend. He had not purchased the vehicle. He had not repaired it. There was no verified reason for his biological evidence to appear inside the truck unless he had entered it during or around the time of the crime. The debate soon expanded beyond Scott himself. Attention returned to the original investigation. How thoroughly had detectives explored alternative suspects in 1987? The answer proved complicated. Investigators had received numerous tips during the early weeks following Michelle's disappearance. Some involved suspicious vehicles. Others described unfamiliar individuals seen near isolated roads. Several pointed toward possible strangers in the area. Like many major homicide investigations, hundreds of leads poured into the sheriff's office. Most produced nothing. As detectives increasingly focused on Leo Schofield, however, the investigation naturally concentrated on building or disproving the case against him. That is common in criminal investigations. Resources are finite. Time matters. When detectives believe they have identified the most likely suspect, other leads often receive less attention unless new evidence justifies revisiting them. The later emergence of Jeremy Scott forced observers to ask whether one of those overlooked possibilities had quietly existed all along. Former investigators defended their work. They emphasized that every investigation reflects the evidence available at the time. In 1987, they did not possess modern DNA technology. They pursued the facts they believed pointed most strongly toward Leo. They rejected suggestions that detectives had intentionally ignored evidence or acted in bad faith. Critics did not necessarily accuse investigators of misconduct. Instead, many argued something more subtle. Confirmation bias. Once investigators develop a working theory, human psychology naturally encourages interpreting future evidence through that framework. Contradictory information may appear less convincing. Supporting information may appear stronger than it truly is. Confirmation bias does not require dishonesty. It requires only ordinary human thinking under extraordinary pressure. The Schofield case increasingly became a textbook example discussed by legal scholars, journalists, and innocence organizations examining how major investigations evolve. Questions emerged about witness testimony presented during the original trial. How reliable were memories collected weeks after a traumatic event? How much weight should juries place upon descriptions of marital conflict? Can evidence of arguments establish murder? Or does it simply demonstrate that two young spouses experienced the kinds of problems many couples face? Those questions extended far beyond Michelle's case. They touched the foundations of criminal justice itself. Circumstantial evidence has convicted countless guilty offenders. It has also contributed to wrongful convictions. Its strength depends not upon any single fact but upon how convincingly separate facts fit together. The arrival of Scott's DNA disrupted that arrangement. A new piece had entered the puzzle. One that no one had considered during the original trial. As renewed legal proceedings unfolded, forensic experts revisited biological evidence collected nearly 4 decades earlier. Modern laboratory methods confirmed what earlier testing had suggested. Jeremy Scott's DNA was genuinely present on evidence associated with Michelle's truck. The scientific identification itself was not seriously disputed. The disagreement centered instead on meaning. DNA answers who. It does not always answer when. Nor does it always answer why. Had Scott encountered the truck before Michelle owned it? Investigators found no evidence supporting that possibility. Had he entered it after abandoning it? Again, no evidence clearly established such a sequence. Could he have stolen the truck without committing murder? Possible. But proving that scenario required evidence that simply did not exist. The uncertainty persisted. Outside the courtroom, public opinion shifted dramatically as documentaries, investigative reporting, and podcasts introduced the case to a new generation. Unlike audiences in 1987, these viewers encountered the story knowing about Jeremy Scott from the beginning. Their perspective differed fundamentally from that of the original jury. Instead of hearing only the prosecution's theory, they confronted a mystery containing two competing narratives. One narrative pointed toward a troubled husband convicted after a lengthy trial. The other pointed toward a violent career criminal whose DNA appeared inside the victim's vehicle and who later claimed responsibility. Neither narrative completely erased the other. Instead, they collided. Families remained trapped at the center of that collision. Michelle's relatives continued carrying the unimaginable burden of losing a daughter, sister, and loved one to brutal violence. For them, every renewed hearing reopened memories that had never truly faded. Leo's family continued believing he had been imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. Every legal setback prolonged decades of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Jeremy Scott remained incarcerated for unrelated crimes, his own life marked by violence, instability, and repeated imprisonment. 3 lives had become permanently intertwined by one February evening in 1987. One ended in a drainage canal. One behind prison walls after a murder conviction. One behind prison walls for a long history of violent crime. Yet only one of those men could have delivered the fatal wounds. Or perhaps the complete truth still remained beyond the reach of everyone involved. As attorneys prepared new arguments and courts weighed the significance of the DNA evidence, the case entered an entirely different phase. The investigation was no longer focused solely on identifying Michelle Schofield's killer. It had become a test of whether the American justice system could confront the possibility that scientific advances had fundamentally altered the meaning of evidence presented nearly 40 years earlier. The answer would not depend on emotion, headlines, or speculation. It would depend on whether judges believed that the microscopic traces preserved since 1987 carried enough weight to challenge a verdict that had stood for decades. The legal battle that followed was no longer simply about the murder of Michelle Schofield. It became a struggle over the integrity of a conviction that had survived decades of appeals, public scrutiny, and relentless criticism. Every new motion forced the courts to confront an uncomfortable reality. Modern forensic science had introduced evidence the original jury never saw. The question was no longer whether DNA mattered. The question was whether it mattered enough to undermine confidence in a verdict that had been considered final for years. Defense attorneys argued that the emergence of Jeremy Scott's DNA fundamentally altered the landscape of the case. They maintained that the jury which convicted Leo Schofield had never been given the opportunity to evaluate the existence of another identifiable individual whose biological evidence was connected to Michelle's abandoned truck. Had jurors known that fact, the defense argued, they might have viewed every other piece of circumstantial evidence differently. Prosecutors countered with equal determination. A conviction, they argued, cannot be overturned merely because new evidence introduces another possible explanation. Courts must determine whether the new evidence would probably have changed the outcome of the trial. That is a significantly higher standard than simply raising doubt. The distinction became critical. The legal system does not revisit every old conviction whenever new questions emerge. It demands compelling reasons before reopening cases that have already been decided. Finality is considered an essential part of justice. Without it, every conviction could remain permanently unsettled. Yet justice also depends upon accuracy. That balance, between certainty and truth, lay at the heart of the Schofield case. As hearings continued, attorneys revisited evidence collected nearly 4 decades earlier. Investigative reports were examined line by line. Witness statements were compared against later testimony. Forensic findings that once appeared straightforward were now evaluated through the lens of scientific advances unavailable in 1987. Every document became significant. Every inconsistency attracted attention. Every unanswered question seemed larger than before. The defense emphasized that Jeremy Scott was not an anonymous DNA contributor. He was a documented violent offender whose criminal history included crimes remarkably consistent with opportunistic attacks. His presence inside Michelle's truck was therefore not simply a scientific curiosity. It pointed towards someone demonstrably capable of extreme violence. Prosecutors urged the courts to look beyond Scott's criminal record. Being violent does not automatically make someone guilty of every violent crime. His DNA established contact with the truck. It did not establish precisely when that contact occurred. Nor did it conclusively place him at the murder scene. That distinction remained central to the state's position. Meanwhile, legal observers across the country watched closely. The case had become far larger than one Florida homicide. It represented a broader national conversation about the role of DNA in reviewing old convictions. Since the late 20th century, forensic advances had both convicted previously unidentified offenders and exonerated individuals who had spent years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Each new DNA breakthrough reinforced one difficult lesson. Science evolves. Verdicts do not. The law must somehow reconcile those two realities. Journalists revisiting the case uncovered additional perspectives that had received relatively little attention during the original investigation. They spoke with retired detectives, former prosecutors, defense attorneys, forensic experts, and individuals who had known Michelle personally. No two accounts sounded exactly alike. Some remained convinced that Leo was guilty. Others believed investigators had become convinced too early and built the remainder of the case around that conclusion. Several experts pointed to the danger of hindsight. It is easy, decades later, to criticize decisions made without modern technology. Investigators in 1987 worked within the limits of contemporary forensic science. They followed procedures accepted at the time. That reality complicated efforts to judge the original investigation by today's standards. At the same time, innocence advocates argued that acknowledging those limitations was not an attack on investigators. It was simply an acknowledgement that science had progressed. Evidence once considered inconclusive could now speak with extraordinary precision. Ignoring that progress, they argued, risked preserving an injustice simply because correcting it proved institutionally difficult. Outside the courtroom, public interest intensified through documentaries, long-form investigative reporting, and true crime podcasts. Millions encountered the Schofield case for the first time, often learning about it through the lens of the DNA evidence rather than the original prosecution. Public opinion shifted noticeably. Many viewers found Jeremy Scott's involvement impossible to dismiss. Others remained persuaded by the prosecution's original theory that Leo's troubled relationship with Michelle, combined with the totality of circumstantial evidence presented at trial, still supported the conviction. The divide reflected a broader truth about criminal investigations. Facts rarely speak for themselves. People interpret them through experience, expectation, and belief. One observer sees reasonable doubt. Another sees overwhelming guilt. The same evidence can produce entirely different conclusions. For Michelle's family, however, none of the legal debate altered the central tragedy. Their daughter remained dead. 37 years had passed since they last saw her alive. Birthdays came and went. Holidays arrived with an empty chair still waiting. Anniversaries became painful reminders not only of loss but of uncertainty. Even after decades, the fundamental question remained unresolved in the minds of many. Who killed Michelle Schofield? The answer seemed simultaneously closer and farther away than ever before. Leo continued serving his sentence while pursuing every available legal avenue. His supporters argued that no innocent person should remain imprisoned when another identifiable individual had been connected to critical evidence. His opponents responded that appeals had repeatedly reviewed the case and that the conviction remained legally sound. Jeremy Scott, meanwhile, remained incarcerated on unrelated convictions. He occasionally spoke about Michelle's murder but never in a manner that fully resolved every contradiction surrounding his earlier statements. Some investigators believed portions of his account. Others rejected it almost entirely. His credibility remained deeply contested. One fact, however, did not depend upon his words. His DNA. Unlike memory, biological evidence does not forget. Unlike witnesses, it does not become influenced by publicity. Unlike confessions, it does not seek attention. It simply exists. Interpreting its significance became the true battleground. Forensic scientists explained repeatedly that DNA evidence must always be understood within context. A genetic profile identifies an individual. It does not automatically reconstruct events. Finding someone's DNA inside a vehicle establishes contact. It does not independently establish murder. That scientific caution frustrated many members of the public hoping for a definitive answer. Reality proved more complicated. Criminal investigations rarely hinge upon one perfect piece of evidence. Instead, they involve assembling hundreds of facts into the most accurate reconstruction possible. The challenge in the Schofield case was that the reconstruction created in 1987 no longer fit comfortably with every fact known decades later. Each new review highlighted the tension. Could Leo have killed Michelle despite Jeremy Scott's DNA? Possibly. Could Jeremy Scott have acted alone? Also possible. Did existing evidence conclusively establish either scenario? That remained the very question the court struggled to answer. As legal filings accumulated, another issue quietly gained importance. The preservation of evidence. The Schofield case demonstrated why maintaining biological evidence long after convictions become final is so essential. Had the evidence been destroyed under earlier policies once the conviction was secured, Jeremy Scott's DNA would never have been discovered. The debate would never have occurred. Science would never have been given the opportunity to revisit the past. Across the United States, that lesson influenced discussions about evidence retention, post-conviction testing, and the responsibilities of law enforcement agencies preserving materials from serious criminal investigations. Michelle Schofield's case had become part of a much larger legal legacy. Not because every question had been answered, but because so many remained. The investigation that began beside a rural Florida road in February 1987 had evolved into something few could have imagined. It was no longer only the story of one unsolved mystery hidden inside a seemingly solved murder. It had become a case study in the strengths and limitations of criminal investigation, forensic science, courtroom advocacy, and human judgment itself. As the courts continued weighing arguments built upon decades-old evidence, one reality remained impossible to escape. Somewhere within thousands of pages of testimony, laboratory reports, witness interviews, and legal opinions lay the closest approximation to the truth anyone had yet uncovered. Whether that truth had already been found, or was still waiting to emerge, remained one of the most enduring questions in modern American criminal justice. Nearly 4 decades after Michelle Schofield climbed into her pickup truck for what should have been an ordinary evening errand, the case continued to exist in 2 different worlds at the same time. In one world, preserved inside official court records, Leo Schofield remained the man convicted of murdering his young wife. The verdict had survived appeals, judicial review, and years of legal scrutiny. Under the law, the case had been resolved. In the other world, the one shaped by advancing forensic science and renewed public examination, certainty had begun to fracture. The discovery of Jeremy Scott's DNA had changed the conversation permanently. No court could erase that discovery. No legal opinion could pretend it had never happened. The debate no longer centered on whether Scott had somehow become connected to Michelle's truck. That fact had been established through modern DNA testing. The debate centered on what that connection actually meant. As attorneys continued presenting arguments, legal experts pointed out that post-conviction proceedings differ dramatically from criminal trials. At trial, prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After conviction, the burden often shifts. The defendant seeking relief must demonstrate that newly discovered evidence would probably have produced a different outcome before the original jury. That distinction is enormous. Evidence capable of creating doubt in the public does not automatically satisfy the legal standard required to overturn a conviction. Courts are not asked whether another explanation is possible. They are asked whether the new evidence is sufficiently powerful to undermine confidence in the original verdict. For Leo Schofield, that distinction became one of the greatest obstacles in his pursuit of a new trial. His legal team argued that Jeremy Scott's DNA, criminal history, and subsequent statements created exactly the kind of reasonable doubt jurors deserved to consider. The state maintained that the conviction rested upon the totality of the evidence, not upon the absence of another suspect. Both sides relied on the same investigative file. Both interpreted it differently. Outside the legal system, journalists continued asking questions that had never completely disappeared. Why had Jeremy Scott's name not surfaced during the original investigation? Was it simply because no forensic technology could identify him in 1987? Or had investigators unknowingly overlooked opportunities that, viewed through today's perspective, might have redirected the investigation? Retired detectives defended their work. Many explained that hindsight inevitably creates the illusion of missed opportunities. Every major homicide investigation generates hundreds of tips, many of them contradictory or entirely false. Detectives must decide, often within days, which leads deserve limited investigative resources. Those decisions shape every case. Sometimes they lead directly to the offender. Sometimes they unintentionally leave important questions unanswered. The Schofield investigation had become a striking example of how scientific advances can reopen those questions years later. As renewed attention focused on Jeremy Scott, investigators and journalists carefully reconstructed his criminal timeline. They found a pattern of offenses committed across Central Florida. Vehicle thefts, burglaries, random acts of violence. Crimes driven less by personal relationships than by opportunity. Unlike the prosecution's original theory involving domestic conflict, Scott's documented criminal behavior suggested a different possibility. A chance encounter. A crime committed against someone selected not because of who she was, but because she happened to cross paths with a dangerous offender. That possibility deeply unsettled many observers. Random violence carries a particular kind of fear. Domestic homicide, while tragic, often appears isolated within personal relationships. Random predatory violence suggests something broader. Something capable of affecting anyone. Could Michelle have become the victim of precisely that kind of encounter? The available evidence never produced a definitive answer. Investigators revisited the route Michelle likely traveled on the evening she disappeared. Roadways had changed. Businesses had closed. New neighborhoods stood where open land once existed. The landscape itself had transformed over the decades. Yet certain locations remained recognizable. The isolated road. The canal. The place where her truck had been abandoned. Standing there years later, investigators could appreciate how vulnerable someone might have been after an unexpected confrontation on those lonely roads. Without surveillance cameras. Without mobile phones. Without witnesses. The Florida of 1987 offered countless stretches where violence could unfold unseen. Modern audiences sometimes forget how differently criminal investigations operated before the digital age. No GPS records. No cell phone location data. No traffic cameras documenting every passing vehicle. No social media timelines reconstructing victims' final hours. Investigators depended overwhelmingly on eyewitnesses, physical evidence, and traditional detective work. When those sources failed, mysteries often endured. Michelle's murder belonged to that era. One of the most revealing aspects of the renewed investigation involved the evidence itself. Forensic specialists emphasized that biological samples collected in 1987 had been preserved with sufficient care to allow testing decades later. That preservation proved invaluable. It also illustrated the foresight of crime scene personnel who meticulously collected evidence even when contemporary technology could not fully analyze it. Those technicians could not have predicted future DNA advances. Yet their careful work allowed future scientists to ask entirely new questions. The case became an example frequently cited by forensic professionals discussing the importance of preserving evidence indefinitely in serious violent crimes. Legal scholars also found the Schofield case significant for another reason. It illustrated the complex relationship between factual innocence and legal innocence. The public often assumes those concepts are identical. They are not. Factual innocence asks a simple question. Did the individual actually commit the crime? Legal proceedings ask additional questions. Was the trial fundamentally fair? Were legal standards satisfied? Would newly discovered evidence probably have changed the verdict? Those questions sometimes produce outcomes that frustrate both supporters and critics. A court may determine that new evidence is insufficient to justify overturning a conviction without declaring that the evidence lacks importance. Likewise, new evidence may raise serious concerns without conclusively identifying another killer. That complexity defined the Schofield litigation. As documentaries and investigative series introduced millions to Michelle's story, another consequence emerged. Public awareness of wrongful convictions expanded. The Schofield case became part of broader discussions surrounding criminal justice reform, post-conviction DNA testing, and the need to continually evaluate forensic evidence as science evolves. Yet amid those debates, Michelle herself risked becoming overshadowed. Behind every legal argument stood a 20-year-old woman whose life ended violently on a rural Florida road. Friends remembered her laughter. Family remembered birthdays. Photographs preserved a smile permanently frozen in youth. Everything that followed, the investigations, trials, appeals, documentaries, and legal controversies, began with that single irreversible act of violence. The passage of time altered many things. Investigators retired. Attorneys passed away. Judges left the bench. Technology transformed beyond anything imaginable in 1987. But Michelle remained 20 years old forever. That reality gave the case its enduring emotional weight. Every renewed hearing represented more than legal procedure. It represented another attempt to answer a question her family had carried for decades. Who took Michelle's future? The answer still resisted certainty. Jeremy Scott remained an undeniable part of the story. His DNA ensured that. Leo Schofield remained an equally undeniable part. His conviction ensured that. The tension between those two facts prevented the case from settling into the comfortable finality that most homicide investigations eventually reach. Instead, it occupied an uneasy space between solved and unsolved. Legally resolved. Factually debated. Scientifically reopened. Emotionally unfinished. Few criminal cases remained so intensely scrutinized after nearly 40 years. The Schofield investigation endured because every major development seemed to create as many questions as answers. The conviction appeared definitive. Then DNA complicated it. The DNA appeared compelling. Then legal standards complicated that. Jeremy Scott confessed. Then inconsistencies complicated the confession. Every apparent breakthrough led investigators back into uncertainty. Perhaps that is why the case continues to resonate. Not because it offers easy conclusions, but because it demonstrates how fragile certainty can become when new evidence emerges decades after a jury believes it has already reached the truth. Somewhere inside thousands of pages of testimony, forensic reports, investigative notes, and judicial opinions lies the complete sequence of events from that February evening in 1987. Whether every piece has been found, or whether one crucial fragment still remains hidden, continues to define one of Florida's most enduring criminal mysteries, a case where science illuminated part of the darkness but stopped just short of revealing everything. The story of Michelle Schofield had entered a stage rarely seen in criminal investigations. The passage of time, rather than burying the case, had made it more complicated. In many cold cases, decades bring silence. Witnesses disappear. Evidence deteriorates. Memories fade beyond recovery. But Michelle's case followed a different path. Time introduced a new witness that no investigator in 1987 could have imagined. Science. The DNA profile recovered decades later did not carry emotion. It did not remember arguments. It did not interpret relationships. It did not respond to courtroom pressure. It simply identified a biological connection that had remained hidden since the night Michelle disappeared. And that single discovery forced everyone involved to reconsider the past. For Leo Schofield, the DNA evidence represented the possibility that the truth might finally emerge. After spending decades maintaining his innocence, he now had something more powerful than his own words. He had scientific evidence suggesting another person had been inside Michelle's truck. For those who believed in his conviction, however, the situation was far more complicated. They argued that the presence of Jeremy Scott's DNA did not erase the evidence presented during the original trial. They pointed to the circumstances surrounding Michelle's disappearance, the problems within the marriage, and the information investigators gathered in 1987. To them, the question remained the same. What role, if any, did Leo Schofield play in his wife's death? The renewed debate revealed something fundamental about criminal cases. A person can be connected to a crime in multiple ways. Evidence can point toward one individual while failing to completely eliminate another. That is why homicide investigations are rarely solved by a single fact. The strongest cases are built from timelines, motives, physical evidence, witness accounts, and forensic findings all converging toward the same conclusion. The difficulty in Michelle's case was that the convergence had changed. A new piece of evidence had entered the equation. And it was impossible to ignore. As attorneys examined the possibility of Jeremy Scott's involvement, they also revisited his life before and after Michelle's murder. Scott's history painted a troubling portrait. He had repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to commit crimes against strangers. His offenses often involved entering places where he did not belong, taking what was not his, using intimidation or violence when confronted. This pattern mattered because it provided a possible explanation for a scenario that investigators had not seriously considered in 1987. A stranger attack. A random encounter. A victim chosen by opportunity rather than personal connection. The original investigation had largely centered around the idea that Michelle's killer was someone close to her. The new evidence introduced a completely different possibility. That the person responsible may have been someone who entered her life for only a few terrifying minutes. This possibility changed the emotional nature of the crime. If Michelle was killed by someone she trusted, the tragedy represented a devastating betrayal. If she was killed by a stranger, it represented a horrifying moment of random danger. Both possibilities carried their own kind of pain. Investigators reviewing old cases often face a difficult psychological challenge. They must separate what they know now from what investigators knew then. Modern observers sometimes ask why detectives did not identify Scott immediately. The answer is simple. They could not identify someone whose identity science could not reveal. In 1987, DNA databases did not exist in the form they do today. There was no national system instantly comparing biological evidence from crime scenes across decades. A sample collected from Michelle's truck could not simply be uploaded and matched. The evidence remained silent. Even if investigators suspected a stranger, they had no practical way to determine who that stranger was. This reality became one of the strongest arguments made by those defending the original investigation. They believed detectives followed the evidence available at the time. They did not ignore DNA. The technology simply had not arrived. But critics responded with another point. An investigation is not judged only by the limitations of its era. It must also be judged by whether the conclusions remain reliable when new evidence appears. That debate became increasingly important as the case moved through the legal system. The emergence of Scott's DNA also raised questions about how evidence is interpreted decades after collection. During the original trial, certain physical findings had been presented as supporting the prosecution's theory. Years later, defense attorneys argued that those same findings deserved a different interpretation. This is one of the most challenging aspects of reviewing old convictions. Evidence rarely changes. But the understanding of evidence can change dramatically. A fingerprint once considered meaningless may become crucial. A biological sample once impossible to identify may reveal a suspect. A witness statement once viewed as convincing may appear less reliable when examined through modern psychological research. The Schofield case existed at the intersection of all those realities. Meanwhile, Jeremy Scott's own statements continued creating controversy. Some observers believed his confession contained details suggesting genuine knowledge of the crime. Others believed his story was too inconsistent to trust. Experts studying criminal confessions often emphasize that admissions must be carefully examined. A confession is powerful because people naturally assume someone would not claim responsibility for a murder unless they committed it. But history has repeatedly shown that assumption can be wrong. False confessions have occurred in high-profile cases around the world. Sometimes individuals confess because of psychological pressure. Sometimes because they seek notoriety. Sometimes because they insert themselves into cases they learned about through public information. The challenge is separating a true confession from a false one. In Scott's case, that challenge became especially difficult because his statements existed alongside physical evidence. His DNA created a foundation. His confession added another layer. But the contradictions prevented a simple conclusion. The legal system had to examine not only what Scott said, but why he said it and whether his statements matched facts unavailable to the public. Every inconsistency mattered. Every accurate detail mattered. The difference between truth and deception often exists in those smallest details. As public attention increased, Michelle's story reached people who had never heard her name before. New generations learned about the young woman whose murder had divided opinions for decades. They saw photographs taken before tragedy. They heard stories from people who remembered her personality rather than just the crime connected to her name. This mattered because cold cases can sometimes become reduced to evidence. DNA, court documents, suspect names, legal arguments. But behind every case file is a person. Michelle was not a case number. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with plans and possibilities. Her life ended before she had the chance to experience decades of ordinary moments that others take for granted. That human reality remained at the center of every discussion. For Leo Schofield, the years behind bars represented more than lost freedom. They represented lost time that could never be recovered. Birthdays, family events, entire chapters of life disappeared. For those who believed he was innocent, every additional year represented a continuing injustice. For those who believed he was guilty, every legal challenge represented another painful reopening of a wound that had already been judged. The conflict became emotional as much as legal. And at the center remained a question without a universally accepted answer. Did the evidence prove that the right person had been convicted? Or had the arrival of DNA revealed a mistake hidden for decades? The courts would continue examining those questions. But outside the courtroom, the debate continued among experts, journalists, and the public. Some viewed the DNA discovery as the beginning of a correction. Others viewed it as a complication added to a case that already had an explanation. Neither side could completely dismiss the facts supporting the other. That was what made Michelle Schofield's case so difficult. It was not a mystery because there was no evidence. It was a mystery because there was too much evidence pointing in different directions. A conviction. A DNA match. A confession. A disputed investigation. A victim whose family still waited for complete answers. Nearly 40 years after Michelle's final journey began, the question that haunted Florida remained unchanged. Not simply who had been connected to the crime. Not simply who had been accused. But who had actually walked away from Michelle's truck after her life was taken, carrying with them the final secret of what happened on that February night. The longer the Michelle Schofield case remained under examination, the more it became a battle between two different versions of reality. One version existed inside the original courtroom, where jurors listened to testimony, examined evidence, and ultimately decided that Leo Schofield was responsible for his wife's murder. The other version emerged decades later, built upon DNA technology that did not exist when that verdict was reached. Between those two versions stood the same question that had followed the case from the beginning. What really happened on the night Michelle disappeared? The answer seemed simple when the investigation first began. A young woman vanished. Her body was discovered. Evidence pointed toward her husband. An arrest followed. A conviction followed. For many people, that sequence represented justice. But decades later, the appearance of certainty had been replaced by something far more complicated. The discovery of Jeremy Scott's DNA inside Michelle's truck created a conflict between past and present. It forced investigators, attorneys, and the public to confront a difficult possibility. A case can be legally finished while the search for the truth continues. This tension became especially clear as experts reviewed the evidence through a modern forensic perspective. One of the most important questions involved the timing of Scott's DNA presence. The scientific result was clear. His genetic profile was found on evidence connected to the truck. But DNA alone does not create a timeline. It cannot announce the exact moment a person touched an object. It cannot explain the circumstances of that contact. It cannot describe the events surrounding the biological transfer. Those limitations became central to the debate. Supporters of Leo Schofield argued that Scott's DNA could not be ignored because there was no obvious innocent explanation for why a violent offender's biological material appeared inside Michelle's vehicle. They believed the discovery represented a major breakthrough. A forgotten suspect had finally been identified. Opponents responded that the presence of DNA, while significant, did not automatically prove murder. They argued that investigators needed to establish how and when Scott entered the vehicle before reaching a definitive conclusion. The disagreement highlighted one of the most misunderstood aspects of forensic science. DNA is incredibly powerful. But it is not magic. It answers some questions with extraordinary precision while leaving others unanswered. A fingerprint can identify contact. A DNA profile can identify biological origin. Neither automatically reconstructs an entire crime. That reconstruction requires context. And context was exactly what the Schofield case continued to lack. As attention returned to Jeremy Scott, investigators examined every available detail of his life around the time of Michelle's death. His criminal history revealed a man familiar with breaking into vehicles and taking property from strangers. His offenses often involved situations where victims were selected because circumstances allowed opportunity. A parked car. An unlocked door. A vulnerable moment. This pattern made one theory increasingly difficult for many observers to dismiss. Perhaps Michelle was not targeted because of who she was. Perhaps she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The idea was horrifying because it transformed the crime from a personal conflict into a random act of violence. It suggested Michelle may have encountered a stranger whose only intention was theft, but whose actions escalated into murder. For investigators accustomed to examining relationships and motives, this represented a major shift. Traditional homicide analysis often begins with the victim's circle. Family. Friends. Partners. Enemies. People with access. People with reasons. But some killers operate differently. They do not need history with their victims. They need only opportunity. The possibility that Scott represented this type of offender changed the way many people viewed the case. Yet the original evidence against Leo Schofield could not simply disappear. During the trial, prosecutors presented a narrative built around the circumstances of the marriage. They described a relationship marked by conflict. They presented testimony from people who had witnessed disagreements. They argued that emotional tension had created a motive. The defense challenged that interpretation. Many couples argue. Many marriages experience conflict. Arguments alone do not explain murder. That disagreement remained one of the most important issues surrounding the conviction. How much weight should juries give relationship problems when evaluating homicide cases? The answer depends on the totality of evidence. In some cases, domestic conflict reveals escalating danger. In others, it becomes a misleading distraction that causes investigators to overlook alternative explanations. The Schofield case became an example of how difficult that distinction can be. Years after the trial, some individuals who had originally supported the conviction began reconsidering the possibility that the investigation had followed the wrong path. Others remained convinced that the original verdict reflected the truth. The division was not based simply on emotion. Both sides pointed toward evidence. Both sides believed they were defending justice. That was what made the case so difficult. It was not a conflict between people who cared and people who did not. Nearly everyone involved wanted the same thing: a truthful answer. But the path toward that answer had become increasingly uncertain. Meanwhile, the passage of time created another challenge: memories. Witness testimony from 1987 had enormous importance during the original trial. But memory is not a recording device. Psychological research has shown that human recollection can change over time. People unintentionally alter details. They combine information from different moments. They become influenced by conversations, media reports, and repeated questioning. This does not mean witnesses are dishonest. It means memory itself is imperfect. Decades later, reviewing old testimony required extraordinary caution. A statement that appeared clear in 1987 could look very different when examined through the understanding of modern psychology. The same applied to investigative decisions. Detectives were not working with future knowledge. They were attempting to solve a murder with the information available at that moment. Every investigation is a race against time. Evidence disappears. Witnesses forget. Suspects move. The first theory developed by investigators often becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. Sometimes that foundation is correct. Sometimes it is not. The danger appears when a theory becomes so accepted that every later discovery is forced to fit within it. That possibility became one of the central criticisms surrounding the Schofield investigation. Had investigators followed the evidence? Or had the evidence been interpreted through a theory formed too early? The answer remained disputed. As legal proceedings continued, supporters of Leo Schofield argued that the discovery of Scott's DNA represented exactly the type of new evidence courts should consider. They pointed out that no original jury had ever heard about Scott. No original jury had evaluated his criminal history. No original jury had considered his later statements. They argued that presenting this information to a new jury was essential. Only then, they believed, could the case truly be judged. Those defending the conviction disagreed. They argued that decades of legal review had already examined the case thoroughly. They warned against allowing every new theory to erase previous judgments. The justice system, they said, must also protect the principle that verdicts eventually become final. The debate continued. And while lawyers argued over standards and procedures, Michelle's family remained trapped between the past and the present. For them, the legal arguments were not abstract. Every document represented years stolen from their lives. Every hearing represented another reminder of the violence that destroyed their family. They wanted justice. But justice required certainty. And certainty remained painfully distant. The strange reality of the Schofield case was that the discovery of DNA brought the truth closer while simultaneously making the mystery deeper. Before the DNA testing, many believed they knew exactly what happened. After the testing, new possibilities emerged. The evidence did not close the door. It opened another one. Behind that door stood a series of unanswered questions. Why was Jeremy Scott's DNA inside Michelle's truck? Was his confession genuine or calculated? Could the original investigation have missed a stranger who crossed paths with Michelle? Could the evidence presented at trial still prove Leo's guilt despite the discovery of another man's DNA? Each question carried enormous consequences. Because somewhere between the abandoned truck, the rural road, the courtroom, and the evidence locker existed the complete story of Michelle Schofield's final hours. A story that had remained hidden for decades. A story that science had begun to reveal. But a story that still had not fully spoken. The Michelle Schofield case had reached a point where every new discovery seemed to create a deeper mystery. After nearly 40 years, the investigation no longer moved like a traditional homicide case. It moved like an archaeological excavation, with each layer of evidence forcing investigators to reconsider what they thought they already knew. The crime scene photographs from 1987, the original police reports, the courtroom testimony, and the newly discovered DNA evidence all represented different pieces of the same shattered story. The challenge was no longer finding evidence. The challenge was understanding how every piece fit together. For Leo Schofield, the fight had become a battle against time itself. Decades had passed since the jury convicted him. Decades since he last lived as a free man. Decades since he watched his wife leave home and never return. He continued to maintain the same position he had stated from the beginning. He did not kill Michelle. His supporters argued that his story had remained consistent while the evidence against him had weakened under modern scientific examination. They pointed to the DNA. They pointed to Jeremy Scott's criminal history. They pointed to the confession. They argued that these developments represented more than simple questions. They represented a fundamental change in the understanding of the case. But prosecutors and those who supported the original conviction continued to emphasize another reality. A new suspect does not automatically prove an old conviction was wrong. Criminal cases are rarely as simple as replacing one name with another. The responsibility of the justice system is not to identify someone who appears suspicious. It is to determine whether the evidence proves guilt. That distinction became the center of every legal argument surrounding Michelle's murder. As investigators and attorneys examined Jeremy Scott's involvement, they looked closely at the details of his confession. Confessions have always carried enormous psychological power. When a person says, "I did it," the human mind naturally treats that statement as highly significant. But experienced investigators understand that words alone are not enough. A confession must be tested. It must survive comparison against physical evidence. It must contain details that only the person responsible could reasonably know. In Scott's case, some aspects of his statements attracted attention because they appeared consistent with known information. Other parts created uncertainty. His accounts changed over time. Certain details seemed unclear. Some statements appeared influenced by information already available publicly. That uncertainty created a difficult situation. If Scott was lying, why was his DNA connected to Michelle's truck? If he was telling the truth, why did parts of his story fail to align perfectly with the evidence? The contradiction became one of the defining mysteries of the entire case. Investigators also examined the possibility that Scott's involvement could have occurred differently than he claimed. Perhaps he entered the truck without committing the murder. Perhaps he encountered the vehicle after the crime. Perhaps his DNA represented contact connected to an event that investigators still did not fully understand. Every possibility required evidence. And evidence remained incomplete. That was the painful reality of the case. The DNA provided a powerful connection. But it did not provide a complete explanation. Meanwhile, the original investigation continued to face criticism from those who believed detectives had focused too heavily on Leo from the beginning. They argued that once investigators viewed the husband as the primary suspect, alternative theories received less attention. This phenomenon is not unique to Michelle's case. It is a recognized challenge in criminal investigations. Investigators are human. They analyze information. They develop theories. They follow patterns. But once a theory becomes dominant, there is always a risk that contradictory evidence may receive less consideration. The question was whether that happened here. Former investigators rejected the idea that they ignored other possibilities. They explained that they followed the evidence available at the time. The evidence led them toward Leo. The technology necessary to identify Scott simply did not exist. The debate revealed a painful truth about cold cases. Sometimes the difference between solving a murder and leaving it unanswered is not the dedication of investigators. It is the technology available during the investigation. In 1987, a biological sample was just a biological sample. Decades later, it could become a name, a history, a connection, a new direction. The same evidence existed all along. Only the ability to understand it had changed. As the case continued receiving national attention, experts began discussing the broader lessons it represented. One of those lessons involved the danger of relying too heavily on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is not weak evidence. Many successful prosecutions depend on it. A fingerprint, a financial transaction, a timeline contradiction, a pattern of behavior. Together, these facts can create a compelling case. But circumstantial evidence requires interpretation. Different people may interpret the same facts differently. The danger appears when interpretation becomes mistaken for certainty. The Schofield case highlighted exactly that tension. The prosecution saw a collection of facts pointing toward Leo. The defense saw a collection of unanswered questions. Decades later, the DNA introduced another collection of facts pointing toward Scott. The challenge was deciding which interpretation best reflected reality. As public interest continued growing, Michelle's story became known far beyond Florida. People who had never heard of the case before began examining the evidence themselves. Online discussions expanded. True crime communities analyzed documents. Legal experts debated possibilities. Some declared the case an obvious miscarriage of justice. Others argued that outsiders lacked the full context available to the original investigators and jury. The debate became emotional because the stakes were enormous. If Leo was innocent, then a man had spent decades imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. If Leo was guilty, then the discovery of Scott's DNA represented a misleading but powerful distraction from the actual killer. Either possibility carried devastating consequences. And in both scenarios, Michelle remained the victim. That point became increasingly important as public discussion focused heavily on suspects and legal arguments. The center of the story was not the men connected to the investigation. It was the young woman whose life ended violently. Friends remembered Michelle as someone with energy and ambition. Someone who had dreams beyond the small community where she lived. Someone who expected to experience decades of ordinary life. She never received those decades. Her future disappeared in a single night. Every year that passed represented another year without the complete truth. The emotional weight of that reality influenced every person involved. Detectives who worked the original case carried memories of the investigation. Attorneys carried memories of courtroom battles. Family members carried memories of Michelle herself. And the evidence carried the secrets of that night. The case remained suspended between two powerful forces. The desire for finality. And the demand for truth. Finality says a verdict must eventually matter. Truth says new evidence must eventually matter. When those principles collide, the result is often painful. Because both are essential. A justice system without finality cannot function. A justice system without the willingness to correct mistakes cannot be trusted. Michelle Schofield's murder became a powerful example of that conflict. A conviction had been secured. But questions remained. A DNA profile had been discovered. But answers remained incomplete. A confession had been made. But doubts remained. The investigation had traveled from a rural Florida road to courtrooms, laboratories, and national discussions about justice itself. Yet the most important journey, the journey toward knowing exactly what happened to Michelle, was still unfinished. Because somewhere within the final hours of February 1987 remained a sequence of events that only one person truly knew. The person who confronted Michelle. The person who left her truck behind. The person whose actions ended a young woman's life. And after nearly 40 years, that person's identity remained the greatest unanswered question at the heart of one of Florida's most haunting criminal mysteries. The passage of nearly 4 decades transformed the Michelle Schofield case from a local tragedy into a national example of how the search for truth can continue long after a courtroom reaches its conclusion. What began as a desperate search for a missing 20-year-old woman became a murder investigation, then a conviction, and finally a battle over whether new science had revealed a hidden mistake. But behind every legal argument and every forensic discovery remained the same image that started everything. A young woman who left home and never came back. Michelle Schofield's disappearance was not just a case file. It was a moment that divided a family, changed a community, and created questions that survived longer than anyone involved could have imagined. As the years passed, the people who investigated the crime aged. Some retired. Some moved away. Some never publicly changed their opinions about what happened. The evidence, however, remained. And unlike human memory, evidence could be examined again. That possibility became the foundation of the renewed investigation. Modern forensic science had transformed the way cold cases were approached. Laboratories across the country began reopening old evidence collections, searching for information hidden inside materials that investigators decades earlier had been unable to fully analyze. The Michelle Schofield case became part of that transformation. The evidence collected in 1987 had been gathered during an era when investigators were already attempting to preserve every possible clue, even if the technology of the time could not reveal its full meaning. The investigators who handled those items could not have known what the future would bring. They could not have known that microscopic biological traces would eventually become a voice from the past. They could not have known that a sample invisible to the human eye would one day challenge a conviction. But that is exactly what happened. The emergence of Jeremy Scott's DNA forced everyone to confront a difficult question. What happens when a case believed to be solved is confronted by evidence that did not exist during the original trial? For supporters of Leo Schofield, the answer was obvious. The conviction needed to be reconsidered. They argued that the justice system had an obligation to examine evidence that could potentially identify another person responsible for Michelle's death. They emphasized that the original jury had never heard Jeremy Scott's name. They had never considered his criminal background. They had never seen the DNA evidence. They had never evaluated the possibility that a violent stranger may have been involved. From their perspective, the original trial had been conducted with incomplete information. The verdict, they argued, reflected what people knew in 1987. But people now knew more. Those defending the original conviction viewed the situation differently. They argued that the entire case had to be considered, not just one piece of newly discovered evidence. They pointed to the original investigation, the testimony presented at trial, and the circumstances surrounding Michelle's disappearance. They argued that the presence of another person's DNA did not automatically explain every unanswered question. In their view, the legal system had already examined the evidence and reached a conclusion. Changing that conclusion required more than uncertainty. It required proof. That disagreement became the central battle. Not whether the DNA existed. Not whether Jeremy Scott had a criminal history. But what those facts meant when placed alongside everything else. The conflict demonstrated one of the hardest realities in criminal justice. Evidence does not exist in isolation. It exists inside a story. And different people can interpret the same evidence in very different ways. A prosecutor may see a chain of facts leading toward guilt. A defense attorney may see the same facts creating doubt. A scientist may see limitations. A family member may see decades of unanswered pain. All are looking at the same case. All are searching for truth. But truth in criminal investigations is often complicated, incomplete, and painfully difficult to prove. As the years continued, attention also returned to the original timeline of Michelle's final day. Investigators reconstructed her movements as carefully as possible. The simple routine of a young woman running an errand became the center of a decades-long mystery. What happened between the moment she left home and the moment her truck was abandoned? Who did she encounter? What caused the violence to escalate? How did her vehicle end up where investigators discovered it? These questions remained at the heart of the case. The answers were not found in dramatic revelations or eyewitness accounts. They existed only within fragments. A piece of biological evidence. A statement made years later. A disputed memory. A forensic interpretation. Each fragment offered a glimpse. None provided the entire picture. The case also raised questions about the reliability of early investigations. Modern criminal justice has placed increasing emphasis on avoiding tunnel vision, the tendency to focus too quickly on one suspect or one theory. Investigators today are trained to consider multiple possibilities and continuously test assumptions. But the understanding of investigative psychology has evolved significantly since 1987. At that time, many departments relied heavily on traditional methods. Experience, intuition, behavioral analysis, witness interviews. Those tools remain important. But they also have limitations. Human judgment can be powerful. It can also be influenced by expectations. The Schofield case became part of a broader national conversation about how investigators balance instinct with evidence. How do detectives decide when they have found the right suspect? How do they know when they are following the wrong path? And how should a justice system respond when future discoveries challenge decisions made decades earlier? There are no easy answers. Because every investigation involves imperfect information. Every decision is made under pressure. Every conclusion carries consequences. For Michelle's family, the passage of time brought no true closure. The legal battles continued. The debates continued. The questions continued. Closure is often discussed as though it arrives with a verdict or an arrest. But for many families of homicide victims, closure is more complicated. A conviction may provide a sense of justice. A confession may provide answers. A complete understanding of what happened may provide peace. Without those things, time alone does not heal the wound. Michelle's loved ones continued living with the reality that someone had taken her life and that the complete story remained uncertain. That uncertainty became part of their grief. For Leo Schofield, time created another kind of loss. Every year behind bars represented moments that could never be recovered. Every legal challenge carried the hope of freedom. Every setback carried the weight of disappointment. His supporters continued arguing that the evidence had changed enough to require another examination. His critics continued arguing that the original verdict deserved respect. The debate remained unresolved. And then there was Jeremy Scott. A man whose name had entered the case decades after Michelle's death. A man whose DNA connected him to her vehicle. A man whose own words placed him at the center of the mystery. Yet even his involvement did not produce the simple ending many expected. Because a confession does not erase uncertainty. DNA does not answer every question. A criminal history does not prove responsibility for every crime. The truth required more than one fact. It required understanding the entire chain of events. As investigators, attorneys, and journalists continued examining the case, one thing became clear. The Michelle Schofield investigation represented the complicated reality of cold cases. Time can destroy evidence. But time can also create breakthroughs. Technology can reveal hidden truths. But technology can also introduce new uncertainty. A case can appear closed. Then one discovery can reopen everything. The evidence from 1987 had waited silently for decades. When it finally spoke, it did not provide a simple ending. It created a new chapter. A chapter filled with questions about justice, memory, science, and the possibility that the truth had been hidden in plain sight all along. And as the world continued searching for answers, one question remained above all others. After all these years, after all the investigations, after all the courtroom battles, after all the scientific discoveries, would Michelle Schofield's final secret ever truly be revealed? For nearly 4 decades, the name Michelle Schofield has remained connected to one of Florida's most debated murder investigations. A young woman who left home on an ordinary evening became the center of a mystery that would survive generations of investigators, technological revolutions, courtroom battles, and endless questions about what justice truly means. Her story began with a disappearance. It continued with a discovery. It became a conviction. And decades later, it became a question mark once again. The search for Michelle's killer was never simply about identifying a suspect. It was about understanding a chain of events that began on a quiet Florida road and ended with a young life permanently taken away. For those who believed Leo Schofield was wrongly convicted, the case represented a failure of the justice system, a reminder that human decisions, even those made in courtrooms, can be challenged by discoveries that arrive years later. For those who believed the original conviction was correct, the case represented something equally important: the danger of allowing a single piece of evidence to erase an entire body of investigative work. Between those two positions stood the evidence. Silent. Complicated. Waiting to be interpreted. The DNA connected to Jeremy Scott became the defining element of the modern investigation. It transformed a case that many considered finished into one that demanded renewed examination. The discovery demonstrated the extraordinary power of forensic science. A trace left decades earlier could identify a person who had never been considered a central figure during the original investigation. A name that had been absent from thousands of pages of police files suddenly became one of the most important names in the entire case. But science also revealed its own limitations. DNA could establish a connection. It could not describe the entire event. It could not show exactly what happened inside Michelle's truck. It could not reveal every decision made during those final moments. That information remained hidden somewhere between evidence, memory, and unanswered questions. The confession of Jeremy Scott added another layer of complexity. To many observers, his statements appeared to provide the missing explanation. A violent offender. A connection to the vehicle. An admission of responsibility. The pieces seemed to align. Yet serious investigators know that even the most dramatic evidence must be examined carefully. A confession must be tested. A suspect's history must be considered but not exaggerated. Scientific findings must be interpreted within the complete context of the case. The truth is rarely found in one isolated fact. It exists in the relationship between all facts. That was the challenge facing everyone who continued examining Michelle Schofield's murder. Every answer created another question. If Jeremy Scott was responsible, how did investigators miss him for so long? The answer pointed toward the reality of forensic science in 1987. Investigators did not have access to the tools available today. They could collect evidence. They could preserve evidence. But they could not extract the information hidden within that evidence. A biological sample without DNA technology was like a locked message without a key. The message existed, but no one could read it. That reality changed the way many people viewed the case. Some argued that the original investigators should be judged by the standards of their time. Others argued that justice cannot ignore new evidence simply because it arrives decades later. Both arguments contained a measure of truth. Investigators in 1987 worked without the advantages of modern science. But victims and families living decades later still deserve the most accurate answer possible. That tension has become one of the defining challenges of the modern justice system. Cold cases force society to confront uncomfortable realities. Sometimes the truth is hidden because evidence was unavailable. Sometimes because assumptions became accepted too quickly. Sometimes because the person responsible was never identified. And sometimes because the difference between guilt and innocence rests on details too small to recognize at the time. Michelle Schofield's case contains all of those elements. A young victim. A controversial conviction. A later DNA discovery. A confessed violent offender. A family still seeking answers. A legal system forced to balance finality with fairness. But beyond all of those issues remains the human story. Michelle was 20 years old. At an age when many people are just beginning to discover who they are, her future was taken away. She would never grow older. She would never experience the ordinary moments that define a lifetime. No birthdays beyond 20. No new memories. No chance to see what kind of person she might have become. That is the tragedy beneath every investigation. The legal battles continue. The arguments continue. The evidence continues to be analyzed. But the victim remains gone. For Michelle's family, the passage of time has not changed that reality. Nearly 40 years later, they are still living with the consequences of a crime that happened in a matter of minutes. For Leo Schofield, the years represent a different kind of tragedy. Whether one believes his conviction was justified or not, the reality is undeniable. A significant portion of his life has been defined by this case. His name became permanently connected to a crime he has always denied committing. For Jeremy Scott, the case became another chapter in a life already marked by criminal behavior and imprisonment. His involvement introduced the possibility that the person responsible for Michelle's death had been hidden from investigators for decades. And that possibility changed everything. The Michelle Schofield case remains powerful because it refuses to provide an easy ending. Many stories of crime conclude with an arrest, a trial, and a verdict. This story continued beyond all of those moments. The verdict did not end the questions. The DNA did not end the questions. The confession did not end the questions. Instead, every major development brought the investigation closer to the truth while revealing how complicated that truth could be. That is the nature of some of the most haunting cold cases. They are not remembered because they lack evidence. They are remembered because the evidence tells conflicting stories. A courtroom once declared that the mystery had been solved. Decades later, science suggested that the mystery was not finished. And somewhere between those two realities lies the complete story of what happened to Michelle Schofield. The final answer may exist in evidence already collected. It may exist in a memory that has remained silent. It may exist in a detail that investigators have not yet fully understood. But until every question is answered, the case remains suspended between certainty and doubt. A young woman disappeared. A community searched. A killer was convicted. A new suspect emerged. And the evidence that waited quietly for decades forced everyone to look again. The road where Michelle's life ended has changed with time. The people who investigated the case have changed. The technology has changed. But the question remains exactly the same as it was on the night she vanished. Who was responsible for taking Michelle Schofield away from the world? For nearly 40 years, that question has echoed through courtrooms, police files, and the memories of everyone touched by the case. And until the complete truth is known, Michelle's story will remain one of Florida's most haunting reminders that some mysteries do not disappear with time. They wait. They endure. And sometimes, after decades of silence, the smallest piece of evidence can bring the past back into the light.